On Sunday, the clocks will move forward and there'll be so much more light in the evenings. We're so excited for that. But this often prompts kind of that spring clean kind of a feel, doesn't it?
That's right. Whatever about the clutter of modern living, though, the same process, it did apply in the old days to the traditional thatched cottages in Ireland. And here to tell us all about the features and forgotten details of the traditional thatched cottage is our resident folklorist, Shane Lehan. Shane, you can speak now for the first time today because you were replacing Brendan earlier on the map and everything.
I enjoyed doing the weather, and I enjoyed Win the Wheel as well.
Yes.
Like, you know, I'm mad to tell you about this particular topic because it's a lovely time. And you're saying, you know, the light is going to change now. And, you know, even around my own house, I'm beginning to see dust here and there and so on, you know. But in the old traditional houses, it really was a time for the spring clean. You can imagine the cobwebs, you can imagine the fire lighting all winter, the dust everywhere, the turf, the soot, even the rising damp, the walls would be yellow and so on. And you know, always around this time as well, you had the stations, the spring stations, and people would be mad whitewashing and cleaning up the house as best they possibly could, you know. And if the old lad was sitting in the corner, he'd nearly get a dash of this distemper brush, you know, when he was sitting down. So you have all that idea of being clean and so on. But I've always loved the traditional houses. I've loved looking at them. And my late father, Tig, you know, he was an artist. And he used to paint. And, you know, he was in the style of Paul Henry.
I was just saying that. I looked earlier on and said, is that a Paul Henry?
Yeah.
But that was your dad.
But he always used to paint the thatched houses. And I think that got into my system somehow. I was a bit obsessed with them. And when I was back a young student, practically 40 years ago now, I remember doing archaeology and I was studying stone circles and ring forts, but I had to do a final dissertation and I picked the traditional thatched house.
Did you?
And I went off to Ringaskiddy near Cork here, where they were going to build all the chemical factories. And I came across these magnificent mud-walled thatched houses. It was like going back in time.
That's very old now, that one.
And I went into this particular house, okay? These were made with mud walls.
Thobe, we'd call it. Thobe in Irish.
Thobe, yeah. And you'd have... But going back in this particular house, there was people still living in it without any electricity. And this is only 40 years ago. A lovely couple, Madge and May Kennedy. And there they are looking out over the half door. And I remember going into their house being so honoured to go into beautiful, beautiful home. They had no electricity, but what was interesting is they had a television. And the reason they had a television...
The battery one.
Exactly, because their mom lived to 105 years of age. And when she was 100, the community got together and they bought her television.
Oh, wow.
And I remember going down there, they had an old oil lamp and they had no electricity or anything like that. I went off and I found a wick for them, which was absolutely great. But the television was interesting because we'd be chatting away about Longo and they'd say, stop now, JR is coming on. Right? They were watching Dallas and Dynasty and Falcon Crest and all of that. And all of a sudden, the magic was broken for a while. The television would come out and they'd go back into their life.
It's lovely to get a view of both together, though, isn't
it?
Like
great?
stepping back in time and then flash forward.
But, you know,
JR's on.
I'm honoured to be talking about... Imagine they were thought for a moment that we were talking about them on television. They would be so delighted.
Up there with JR.
Absolutely. And they had a cat called JR, which I kind of loved as well, you know. That was a great part of it. One of the things, though, is that when I talk to anyone about this and my students, I'd say they always come back and say, Shane, mud walls. What do you mean mud walls? Like, it's interesting for us to note. I would have said most houses were built of stone. But in fact, 60, 70, 80% of Irish homes were built with this mud material that was there. And people knew how to make this. They would often find the clay, what we call malabui, which are marlabui, the yellow clay that was there.
Wet
mix it with straw. They would puddle it. You'd often have a fellow with a horse going around in the middle of it, tempering the clay. It would be brought in, it would be packed in. The bottom of the wall would be very wide, and over the days you taper it up to head height, we'll say.
It must have been very warm, though, Shane, with the straw and all that in it. Yeah. Insulation, naturally.
The houses were lovely and warm, thick walls. But what's interesting is you could really only build the mud walls when the swallows were here. So that's an interesting thing because the cob, as it were, the daub, wouldn't actually go off properly at that time.
You're right, actually, yeah.
They obviously stood the test of time, because when you hear something like that, you think, oh, there's no way that lasted.
It lasted, Sinead, because they used to whitewash them. And we often think of whitewashing as just a decorative thing. But this was the protection against the elements. Yeah. So we were whitewashing inside, whitewashing outside, and you continually whitewashed. And the whitewash was made of lime, which is sort of a mortar, if you like. But long ago, when they were making the lime, they often used the shells as well. And the shells, when they, like, you could burn limestone, 900 degrees in the lime kiln for 3 days and you get your slate lime, as it were. But when the shells went in, you often got a pink colour and sometimes a blue colour.
hue,
And in
yeah.
fact, some people would add in an extra colour. And I've seen houses, for example, this one
at
in,
that,
in
that's
Bunratty.
beautiful hue.
Blue. And the idea that all houses had only one white colour isn't the case whatsoever. But up on the roof of that one, for example, you had the thatch. And I think we all have a romantic idea about thatch. And thatching is very interesting. Lots of places are thatched with reed, but in the past, you would have the cereal that was growing close by. So whether it was wheat or whether it was oats, barley for some reason wasn't used very often.
We had Muddy Lock on the island. You know that what is that called?
Shaggle.
Is that what it's called? Shaggle.
The rye.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Rye was the one that was used most of all out in the Aran Islands. But the way you put the thatch on was important. We have a lovely expression in Irish, Ní hé lá na gluiche, lá na scollop. The day of the wind isn't a day for the scallops.
No.
And the scallop thatch was fixed on with little pins, if you like, of
I love those.
split hazel.
Yes.
It goes all the way up, you know.
We actually have a shot now. You'll see it in a
and you
second.
can see it there up in the top is the only place where you see the pinning of the ridges on the ridge.
They were so accurate.
Oh, and it's beautifully done. What happens though is that you also had another type of thatch called truss thatch, but the one I love is rope thatch. And the rope thatch was, again, all along the western seaboard.
That's what we did, yeah. I remember it well.
As
We
Laura
lived
will
in a
know,
thatch house for a while,
This
yeah.
is out in Inishmaan.
Yeah.
It's out there. That's MacDonough's house, which is known as Chak Sing now. But the
Chak Sing,
MacDonough's.
yeah.
And you can see what they're using there. They're taking the rope from one side to the other and they're pegging it onto the wall. There was pegs going into the wall on one side. And then you also had...
They're there now.
Yeah. And you also then had the gable end, as it were, because the ropes would go horizontally and they would go vertically. In case, literally, the roof blew off the house.
And
that
that was
was
at the western seaboard.
I wouldn't have a clue. How
Well, you
often
probably
would that have
thatch
to be
what, every
redone?
4 or 5 years, I'd say.
You'd
Touch it up?
You'd be touching up nearly every year because something would
Tiny
happen
bit.
and so on. But a major rethatching would happen maybe, as Maurice says, maybe 2-3 years later on. Then, if the reed would be much longer than that. And what happened is lots of the thatch was covered over in Ireland generally with corrugated iron.
Yes, it
because the
was.
corrugated iron, you didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to
Yeah.
patch. And lots
Such
of
a shame, though.
It is. We lose all of that as well. One of the other features, of course, would be the half door. It's a great traditional feature of the house. But I often have to tell my students, it's not a stable door. It's not a door cut in half. In Ireland, we had a door and a half. So you had the full door, and in front of it, you had the half door. And that was open and closed. That was to keep the children in, the hens out, but more than anything, to keep the light coming into the house. Because, you know, you didn't want to close up that element that was
What
there.
a great idea. And it was almost like a double door, really, wasn't it?
It is a double door.
It's
and
wonderful.
very important for managing the fire and the fireplaces and so on. Often they would take the door off the hinges. If someone had died and was going to be laid out, the door became functional like that. The half door was taken off regularly for a fella to do a bit of a step dance, okay? Because the floors weren't actually what we think floors are at all. We didn't have flags so much. If you were in a place with lots of stone, that was great. But quite often people had an earthen floor, a trampled floor, and they often put the most unusual things in it. And in archaeology, we've found when we're digging these houses,
Like
we find
you're a mud floor, really.
it's a mud floor.
Yeah.
And of course, Mara, you'd have a dance and you'd have people doing the
Yes,
clear
you would,
batter
yeah,
to
yeah.
bash down the door, or bash down the floor. But we've often found horse skulls buried underneath.
Why?
Okay, and there's a number of theories. We don't know why.
Right.
One theory is that certainly when there was music being played and there was somebody there, and you know when you're tapping your foot to get the percussion, but to amplify the noise from the player or whoever, the fiddle player or the piper, that's one idea. The second was people used to thrash inside in the house, and they'd have the flails.
Oh.
And to do that, you needed to hear the thud of the flail hitting the floor, and that's what amplified it. Because you know what? If you weren't doing that properly, you get a clip of the flail across the head, and it would be no good, you know.
Incredible. I never heard about that. I think that's incredible information, even people watching.
Sometimes people slept in front of the floor, and there's a theory that it was insulation, that you weren't going to get the damp coming up from the ground. And talking about that, there's another aspect that a lot of people remember, and that would be the wheel bellows, okay? The bellows are something that are particularly good. But before we go to the bellows, can I just say, I want to point out this lovely lamp, okay?
Yes.
Because remember I said I went into Madge and me, these two lovely ladies.
Those lovely women, yeah.
And what happened is that I got a wick for the lamp, which was nearly gone. And what happened then is that I wrote a little bit about this in my book, and I got a message out of the blue from relations of Madeleine May's, okay, May O'Mahony, and her mother. She was a cousin of theirs. I got to see them, and when I went out, I was telling them all about Madeleine May. And what did they do? They gave me a gift of this beautiful lamp. So this is actually the lamp that was in Madeleine May's house, that lit their house. And I'm so honoured, and I'm so delighted.
Well,
and
it's with the best custodian with you,
listen, I
Shane.
have it in my study, and it's kind of full circle for me to go from when I started my career to where I am now. It's something I really cherish.
Shane,
It's beautiful.
thanks for bringing it in and sharing it with us. It's so beautiful, and thank you to that family as well. But you gave it to the best man, that's for
They
sure.
did.
That's great to
They
hear.
You're a
absolutely
meal,
did.
Shane.
Yeah, lovely
Thanks, Shane.
people.
Great
Fascinating
info.
information as ever.
Amazing.
Really, we'll see you again soon.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
Shane. Now, that's it for today.